Hey everybody, Jay Schlansky here from the Fifth Trooper Network. I just want to take a moment to thank you for checking out this show. Did you know that over at thefifthtrooper.com we have tons of other content, including blogs, other podcasts, all kinds of stuff. In addition, if you want access to exclusive content, you can join us on patreon.com/thefifthtrooper and join at any level and you'll get access to exclusive blog articles, access to our private Discord, and much more. So please check us out, and thank you so much for all your support.
Welcome to the Notorious Scoundrels, a Star Wars Legion podcast bringing you the latest news, general perspective, and competitive discussion.
Hello and welcome back to the Notorious Scoundrels. It is 2024.
Oh man, it is. You are right. Wow. Yeah.
I'm Kyle. I'm here with Mike.
Hey. It is 2024.
Yeah.
New year, new us. But not really.
Same, ish.
Same us.
I always don't get me wrong. It's good to have goals. What always amuses me is that people are inspired not only, but it seems like significantly just because it's the calendar date changes to like make new goals. Like you can make goals anytime for any reason, really.
I also find it really interesting because it's not even like a particularly fun date to like set a goal on. Like it's like, oh man, it's like crappy and shitty outside, you know? It's like like I don't this isn't like a really great time to turn a new leaf, you know? I don't know.
Yeah. It's like I want to run more, and then you look outside and you're like, I don't want to run more.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. I went outside today in shorts just to like get a little exercise. I was like, yeah, it's 40 degrees, and I was out there for like 5 minutes. I'm like, no, I'm going back inside. I'm done.
I did go to the gym today, and
Nice.
it was very crowded. But that's not an unusual thing for me. But it was funny how it's funny how you see a significant uptick in that sort of thing
Oh,
immediately
I'm
after the
I'm
new
sure
year.
you decided to go to the gym on like probably their busiest day of the year. I have to imagine, right?
Well, I think there's probably like a non-zero amount of people that stayed up too late last night, and maybe like tomorrow
Sure,
or
sure.
the third. But yeah. Anyway, goals are good. It's good to have goals. I
Goals
encourage
are good.
everyone to go out there and make a goal that is not just a 2024 goal, but a whenever goal. All right. We are going to talk about Legion today. This is not like a self-help podcast. I mean, it is for
Or
Legion
Legion.
players.
Yeah.
Yeah, specifically for Legion. So, yeah, you want to talk about, excuse me, Golden Sprue first?
Yeah, so there is an event up at Golden Sprue in Schenectady, New York. It's on January 27th. You can find it on Best Coast Pairings, and I'm sure that Jay will go ahead and link the registration in the YouTube info below and on whatever other platform you're listening on. That's just the one I tend to be familiar with the most. It's going to be streamed by the Fifth Trooper, from my understanding, and I think it's probably going to be 5 round Swiss. It's got a total of 48 players, which is not, I don't think, is it an even number for? I guess not technically, but
It is for like the first couple of rounds, and then it starts to get a little weird. Yeah.
yeah. I do think that we will have probably a winner. And I think last year we called it like the Nick Bodnar Invitational because I'm pretty
Yeah.
sure he won that one. But yeah, it's gonna be fun. Last year was a blast. I gotta say, out of all of the Legion tournaments I've been to, I would say that it's the most it's definitely about Legion, but the hotel rooms and the place that you play are like 15 feet from each other. So it's just like you sort of roll out of bed, you kind of like walk in, you hang out for a bit, and then like everybody's just playing Legion and hanging out there all day because everybody's it's like the convention room is right there, and then there's just like a couple spindle arms off that specific room that we're playing in. And we just like we played like Magic afterwards and hung out and ordered like 15 pizzas to the hotel and all just like we had the hotel to ourselves basically. It's basically we own a hotel for a weekend and just throw a giant party. Um
A nerd party.
yeah, nerd Legion party.
Right.
And I think this year, because of how successful it was last year it was like an Age of Sigmar and a Star Wars tournament. My understanding is that I think it's just a Star Wars tournament this year because it we had so many people interested.
Okay.
Um,
Awesome.
so we're gonna have even more space. Nick Bodnar is bringing all of his sweet tables, so we'll have the PAX portfolio of tables, and yeah, so that's on the 27th of January. Highly recommend people take a look at it and come hang out. I'll be there as well as I think Jay and Evan and Nick. I'm sure there's a bunch of other people that I'm missing on that list. I think Cirillo will be there too. Um, so yeah.
Awesome. Sounds super fun.
Yeah, I'm excited. It's definitely like yeah, we get some like worlds practice in, but we also just get to hang out and not be sweaty. So
Yep. Sounds great.
yeah,
Speaking of worlds practice, I understand that you guys did a basically roundtable discussion of the worlds format while I was traveling for Christmas.
that is accurate.
So
We took the opportunity of you not being here to to be like,
Dad's not here. We're talking about whatever we
we
want.
want, yeah. So, but it probably would be good if people heard your thoughts on it too. I suspect.
So I did not listen to the episode, so I apologize in advance if some of this is repetitive with what you guys said. The sentiment around this format has been pretty um one-sided for the most part.
I think that's fair.
So I don't think anything I'm going to say is a shock to people. Before I it's going to be a relatively brief opinion because I think much has been said about this already. I will say that I think the most constructive thing from here on out, because it seems very unlikely that the format will actually change in between now and then,
Yeah.
is to make sure that whatever feedback is delivered in a way that's like respectful and constructive so that they can use it for next year. Um, so anyway, my thoughts on the format. Uh, I don't inherently have a problem with like a require undefeated style tournament. There have been a lot of tournaments in Legion's history that are like that. I w I wish that if that was the thing, that it was either A, Swiss for a significant portion of it. Like, like PAX was 6 round Swiss.
6 round Swiss and then a cut to top 8 or something.
Right. So if you lost the game on the first day, you could still come back and play some more standard format Legion. Um, the whole like 3 rounds and then a cut with one loss getting you removed is really rough for a 3 day tournament because look, I know that there is a lot to do at Adepticon. Um, Part of the problem with the whole like, at least for me personally, like if you get cut, you can just do lots of other fun stuff at Adepticon is at least for me, the most fun I have at conventions is when I can like plan things specifically, whether it's participating in tournaments, doing things with specific people. Like you don't know who's going to be available on day 2 to like do stuff with, even if it's I'll bring this board game and let's set up a game of whatever. It's hard to sign up for events if you're like, well, am I going to be available on day 2 or not? So I I wish that it was either Swiss for the first 2 days, or there was some kind of redemption bracket where you could be like guaranteed a tournament of standard format, 800 point Swiss Legion that you could still participate in, even if you got eliminated on day 1. Um, and there's, if you want to see the convention, you can always drop, right? In
Yeah.
that situation. So I don't know. It didn't make a lot of sense to me, especially if they already have to make 128 tables for the first day. Like you're gonna have all those tables, you're gonna have all that terrain. why not just like leave it out and let people play more games of 800 point standard format Legion? I know that they're doing like unconventional warfare and maybe there's a doubles tournament and stuff.
There is a doubles
Personally,
tournament. Yeah.
um, I don't care about any of those random formats. I know they can be fun. It's like it's not for me. And it's also probably not what the 256 people that are coming to Adepticon play Legion like are coming to Adepticon for. Right?
Yeah.
These are all people with invites. These are all people that are into competitive Legion. Uh, and I wish there was like an official way, especially with the way they set up the ticket wall and stuff, which I think is a super interesting idea. Um, I wish there was an official way to like continue playing tournament format Legion after you get eliminated from being able to win the whole thing. And it doesn't seem like it would be hard to set that up. But yeah, it is what it is. I appreciate the value of like the more casual formats. You know, that's like there's always tournaments are very visible, right? You always get a lot of people like walking by, especially when you have like a stream set up. People are like, "Ooh, what's that?" They're walking up. Um, I think it's great to have a vehicle for like new players to be informed about what it is and maybe even like learn to play. I feel like last year they had a couple tables that were set up specifically to just for learn to play games if people were interested, which I think is great. I hope that they do that again. I hope there's, you know, the learn to play thing at PAX was apparently very popular. Um, but I think all that stuff is like super great and important for the growth of the game. But so are like large competitive tournaments just because they're so visible and that's what people want to do, frankly. So, um, yeah, it's unfortunate that losing on day one just kind of means that if you want to play an 800 point game of Legion, you got to do a pickup game
Yep.
on days 2 and 3. Um, so, but I would encourage people to just be like respectful and polite about communicating that feedback. You know, AMG will be there. AMG OP will be there at Adepticon. I don't know if they're going to have a formal like survey. Uh, I hope that they do. I feel like people are always more productive and civil when there's an actual formal outlet for feedback. Um, you know, when there's like no formal outlet, that's when things tend to get less civil. uh,
I know. I feel like I definitely there's a convention I go to every year that does that. I'm starting to think it might be Nova. I don't know. I fill out like a 50-page like form every time I go. It's either Nova, LVO, or Adepticon, and I'm not remembering which one it is.
I
But
think it's LVO.
okay, maybe
Uh,
that's what it is.
yeah. But anyway, I hope that there is a vehicle to provide feedback besides just like walking up to people and talking to them. I mean, if that's the only way, then you know, I
I
would
know.
encourage people to do that in a way again that's respectful.
Yeah.
Um,
Please
but
make sure. Please. I just generally that's not how that goes.
no, I just yeah, again, emphasis on respectful and polite.
Yeah.
It's okay to disagree with something. It's okay to dislike something. It is not okay to be a douche.
Yeah.
So, yeah. All right, and that's all I have to say about that, as
Uh,
Forrest Gump said.
I do want
Do
to
you
just
have any?
make one
Sure.
minor amendment to what we talked about last week.
Okay.
Uh, we had specified that the first day was 4 rounds. It is actually three.
Yep.
I'm not
Okay.
sure. I've heard a couple places that like maybe the tournament document originally said four and then it was changed to three. I don't know what's what there, but it is three. Um, you have to go 3-0 on day one as opposed to I think last cast we said we had been like, oh, you got to go 4-0 on day one and not drop a game, which is significantly different. Um, at least in practice as opposed to theory.
Yes.
Oh,
Uh, yeah. Yeah. It's 3-3-2, right? For the
that
games per
is
day.
that is my understanding.
Okay.
Yes. Um, so yeah, you gotta go 8-0 to win worlds.
Yeah. I have no problem, by the way, with the 3 games per day thing. I think that's great.
3 games.
I
I don't like 4 games per day
no, it's too
personally.
much. It's
That's
too
too
much.
much.
Yeah,
It is something we can do. I do not enjoy doing it. It turns uh it turns it into a marathon. Like 3 is a number where I can end the day and feel like we can go get dinner and like be up at a reasonable hour the next day and not feel too bad. But
yeah.
like as soon as we're into like finishing in 11 range, eh,
It's too late.
it's too late. Yeah.
Yeah, it's too much. Yeah, so at least there's that. But
Yeah. 100%. Yeah, for sure.
yep. All right. So, our main topic today, we started doing Faction 101s again because I think it's probably a good time to revisit that. We started with Rebels. I talked about that with Timbo. So, why don't we do Empire? I feel like we've talked about Republic a lot lately. Um,
It's because we have,
yeah.
to be clear.
So we're going to take a little break from that, as much as I know Mike loves to talk about Republic, and I do too. Don't get me wrong.
It's
But
just
yeah,
the most interesting faction. I don't
it's
know. That's all there
yeah.
is to it.
Objectively, uh,
Objectively, yeah.
in undisputably the most interesting faction.
Yeah.
You heard it here first. Uh, yeah. So we are going to talk about Empire today. This is going to be sort of formatted similarly to how we did the Rebels. So we're not going. This is not going to be like a like a tier list of Empire units. We are going to talk just for context a little bit about what things right now people are bringing in Empire, just to kind of frame the discussion. Because when you're talking about strategy for a particular faction, it's unavoidable that you have to talk about how to use the units that is in that faction and that people are using. So we're going to start off just kind of framing like what that is that people are bringing, and then we're going to go into just kind of the broad strengths and weaknesses of the faction and how to play them overall from like a this is a very like top down. This is not going to be like a nitty gritty kind of episode if that's what you're hoping for. So
We'll see.
I mean, it'll be nitty gritty if for it, yeah.
We'll see how nitty gritty we get. That's
Yeah,
all. That's all.
I guess we'll find out. It's me and Mike. So there's always the possibility that like best, um even though we have the best intentions to not get into extraneous details and such that we will anyway.
We may just end up there. We'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see where this rabbit hole takes
We'll
us.
see it takes us.
Yeah.
So first, let's start off with people that are playing Empire right now in tournaments because this is a podcast about competitive Legion, so we have to frame everything about like if you're going to tournament games, whether it's local or convention, whatever. What are people that are playing Empire? What are they bringing, basically?
You're asking me
I'm
that
asking
question?
you. Yeah.
So I'd like to reframe that question, if
Okay.
that's okay. I'd
Sure.
like to reframe that question into what are the people bringing to tournaments that are successful for a
Okay.
game?
Yep. That's fair.
Just because I see
Because
a
people are
lot
bringing
of
like,
empires
yeah,
specifically that people bring to tournaments that aren't so successful. And I think that that's one of the like main things that you got to think about when we're talking about empire is that there's a lot of things you can be doing.
yes,
Um, and only a few of them are actually pretty good. So I think when I think of Empire competitively right now, I'm looking at lists that generally contain multiple characters. Um, and I think and also tend to have higher activation, like lower durability units in them. What I mean by that are mortars, strike teams, things that kind of activation pad you. I think unlike a lot of the other factions that we see right now, Empire is kind of in a place. Empire's in a weird spot, I think, because several of the other factions are really built to be like the sum of their parts is greater than the individual parts on their own.
the whole is greater than the sum of the parts.
Yeah, that one. That's what I was
Yep.
looking for and
Yeah, I
couldn't find
gotcha.
it. Yeah, yeah.
Yep.
And I feel like Empire is sort of predicated on, at least from a design perspective, Empire units tend to be slightly more powerful individually, kind of on the power scale, than most other factions units, but they don't really have inherent things that make them good with other Empire units, with a couple exceptions. IRG, some of the compelled dudes. But overall, like the Empire units are not really helping each other out in the way that like Rebel units help each other out, or Republic units, or Separatists, like or Shadow Collective. Like they've got none of that really going on. So I think competitively, when I see what I'm seeing in Empire lists that I think is good, it kind of goes back to the Luke Cook days of like yesteryear. We're looking at like somewhere between 10 and 12 activations with like last first in bounty hunters or Darth Vader, if that's your cup of tea. We've also got Blizzard Force, but I feel like I don't really consider Blizzard Force to be an Empire list. That might be a controversial opinion.
It
It's
is
sort of it's
it
sort
is
of its own
objectively an
thing.
Empire
It
list.
it is an Empire list, but it's
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 yeah.
not really Empire in the
It
same
doesn't
way
it
that.
doesn't play like a typical Empire list does.
Yeah, it also like I mean like I wouldn't consider a 501st list like a Republic list. Like it is this it's just they're built outside the scope of how you are normally able to play within
Yeah.
those factions. Um so I think Blizzard aside, and frankly, let's I'd like to table the battle forces, I think, for a second, because I think the battle forces are definitely something we need to talk about today.
Yep.
But I think I'd like to at least initially kind of be like, this is how you play Empire without throwing a bunch of special rules at it.
That's fair.
Um,
We can
and
kind of parking lot them till the end.
yeah, it doesn't even
Yeah.
need to have to be the end, but I do think that one of the things I get asked a lot is like, how do I play an Empire list that doesn't play as a battle force and make it good? And I think that that's a conversation worth having. And
Yep.
and I think a lot of it comes down to you need a lot of activations because you need to leverage range. It needs to be in snipers, whatever. Um, and I think the bounty hunters they're just very efficient packages. That's what I see, I think, working at the top tier levels, and I think can work very well right now, from my perspective.
Yeah, I think it's actually pretty similar to what we talked about with Rebels, where just from a list construction perspective, they're kind of good at many similar things. And we with Rebels, we talked about how they can stack high velocity, pierce, and critical at long range. And Empire can do that pretty capably as well, right? They have core choices that can all shoot range four, other than snows, obviously, but you're not taking snows in like a standard quote unquote Empire list, probably. Um, they have access to high velocity snipers. They have a character in Iden who is very much like Cassian in that she has an unlimited range, high velocity piercing sniper rifle. A lot of their special forces choices are very long range. And then they have a lot of good characters with solid command cards that like can be really good playmaker units. The primary difference really, as you noted, not just between Empire and Rebels, but between Empire and the other factions generally, is that each of their units are kind of just designed to be their own thing.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's really what differentiates them from Rebels. You know, Rebels have a lot of characters in particular that are like designed to work together, and Empire characters are just not
You
really.
take Boba Fett, you get Boba Fett, right?
Right.
Like that's I
Exactly.
mean like rule with respect aside, like
Yes.
you get Boba Fett, right? You take IG-88, you're getting IG-88. You're taking Darth Vader, his command cards really don't do anything to help anything in your list other than him for the most part. Um,
Yep.
and they're very selfish pieces in that way. They're definitely more powerful, I think, on a 1-to-1. Like if you're comparing, Vader to like Ahsoka or Vader to Luke, Vader's definitely the more powerful character, but the rebel characters, specifically Ahsoka, like tends to be a little bit more like, yeah, I'm helping my team,
Yep.
right? Um
and Vader's just killing everything all by himself.
Yeah, Vader's like, if everything else around me dies, I really don't care.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Like,
Yep.
I'm just getting in there.
Yep.
Um, yeah,
Yeah. So basically, we're talking about shores, mortars, snipers, Iden, bounty hunters, Vader, Death Troopers ish.
I think the thing one of the things that I would stress about lists that I'm seeing do well right now is that they take a lot of core units,
Hmm.
but they're not investing heavily into them in the way that other factions are, or special forces for that matter. Like
Right.
we're seeing rebels and republic, like the Wookiees are everywhere, arcs are everywhere, commandos are everywhere, Ewok slingers are everywhere. Um, in full squads, to be clear, with the commandos.
Yes.
And I think Empire lists that tend to be successful are not following that trend, really. They're not really taking full squads of scouts. They're
Yep.
not taking officers in their short squads. It's lean and mean on the non-character front, I think, for the most
Yes.
part.
I agree. Yeah. The old like two shores, two mortar thing is kind of a very basic. Like if you're a new Empire player and you want to know what to buy, go buy two boxes of shore troopers.
Yep. Bing bang
Like
boom.
that's the
That's like
first
the
thing you should get.
start to every Imperial list for the most part.
Yep.
Um, yeah,
Yep.
I really think that realistically, you probably only need like two boxes of stormtroopers these days,
Yep.
unless you're like going hard in the paint on doing something specific. But like shores and storms are like shores are definitely better, but they're kind of interchangeable outside of the like their role in the army, right?
Yep. You can mix and match them a little bit too.
Yeah.
Like if you want to take six core with Empire, you could reasonably do like two shores, two mortars, and two storms.
Yep.
And I don't think there's really another faction that has a possible mix like that. There's no way rebels are doing like two vets, two MK2s, and two rebel troopers.
Not these days, no, for
No,
sure
not
not.
these days. So, all right. So we kind of alluded to some of them already, but what is like a standard Empire list good at as far as its strengths?
Yeah, I think for the most part, a good Empire list is gonna do a couple things. It's gonna leverage its range. If you're not leveraging your range as an Empire list, you're I'm not gonna say flat out say you're doing it wrong, but like you should be able to leverage your range in most competitive Empire lists. Empire like melee skews or like close range skews tend to be not as good as how other factions can do it. You're not going to beat Wookiees, doing that. You're not, you're just not gonna. There's dedicated lists that do those things better in other factions.
Yep.
Um, so leveraging range. I think with that being said, being able to actually do significant damage at range 4, I think is a big thing that Empire is good at. I'm not quite sure that right now they're like better than Rebels at it, but I do think that they're like the second best faction at leveraging high volumes of dice at 4, whether that's Death Troopers, Shore Troopers, Stormtroopers with RT-97Cs, whatever. Like the snipers, there's a bunch of options you have there,
Yep.
right? And you should be leaning into it. They also tend to be, I think, with the exception of the Ewok Battle Force, Empire list should probably be the highest activation count armies at a tournament. Um, for the most part,
Yep.
like you should be probably 1 to 2 activations up on your opponent if you're playing Empire, if it's not a mirror.
Yeah, I'd say minimum
Roughly.
10.
Yeah, you definitely should be playing 10. I think, playing 11 or 12, depending on the list, I think is very defensible and even's probably preferred. But a lot of these lists are built on being able to last first with your important pieces. And the scalpels in the list are doing a lot of the work. They're doing a lot of the heavy lifting, mostly in the bounty hunters, I think.
Yep. for sure. And or I would kind of lump Iden slash Inferno in there. The combination
Yeah,
of Iden and Inferno.
totally.
They're much more like poking, right? In a similar way that Cassian kind of just reliably picks up like 1 to 2 dudes a turn. You're gonna get the same thing from the Iden Inferno combo. So
Yeah, I definitely think that that combination specifically, if you don't know where to start, you should start there.
yeah, yep,
Like it is a cheap, efficient, just really good, powerful set of pieces to just put in your Empire list. It will always be good. It will never be bad. Um, like the floor is very high on putting those pieces in your list.
yep,
Inferno Squad is aggressively costed for what it is.
very much so.
And I actually I like that with like a unique units I think should be aggressively costed. I think that that's really cool. I wish that like Clan Ren was in a similar situation in Rebels, like aggressively cost them. You can only take one. That's fine. Not a big deal. Um,
Yeah, especially since they're really best when paired with Iden, who I think you could argue by herself is like maybe a little bit overcosted,
totally.
especially when you compare it to 90 point Cassian.
Yeah. Cassian is definitely a better piece than Iden,
Yeah,
right?
and he's
Um,
25 points cheaper.
and he's also, I dare say, much more flexible in like just what he can do every game. I feel like I don't know. There's a lot of things going on there, but he's a different faction. It's not 1-to-1, right?
Right, 100%. Yeah,
Um, so but I do think like if you're an Empire player and you're like having trouble right now and you don't know where to start, like I would start. I would just tell you get Iden, get Inferno, put him in the army, start there. Um because you can still pretty much put anything else you want around those pieces and it will be fine.
yep. All right, so strengths very similar to Rebels. Good long range, reliable damage, lots of critical, lots of marksman, lots of high velocity and pierce at those ranges. Good independent scalpel pieces in terms of bounty hunters, and then of course you have Mr. Darth Vader, who is just a hammer piece, really like no other faction has access to. Um, I can't think of like any other unit that like if he just gets into your lines and you don't have a real answer for him, you're just like, all right, I'm screwed.
Yeah, I don't think it was always this way.
No,
I think that this is more, I shouldn't say recent, but like within the last 2 years, this
yeah,
is sort of kind of, with the edits to some of his command cards and um he definitely, if you don't have an answer for him, you're in trouble. I do think that he presents an interesting like list building challenge. I think outside Blizzard.
yeah.
Just
I'm struggling a little bit because I love Vader. I mean, I played some version of Vader for almost the entirety of last year.
preaching to the
Um,
choir, man. I tried to make him work for like the first 3 years.
yeah. Um, I did make him work.
I know you did.
No,
I know you did. I
yeah.
just like,
But now I'm after the Blizzard nerfs, I'm struggling a little bit to figure out, and after the choke nerf too, particularly with Operative Vader. Operative Vader was my BFF. I'm struggling a little bit how to fit him into a list. Maybe Inquisitors are an answer there. They're not out yet, so we won't talk about them on this show. But yeah, it's an interesting sort of thought experiment to try and build a list around Vader these days in a way that it didn't used to be. So
yeah, I definitely think like you can probably drop Commander Vader into most lists and like you will win games just by him being in your army, right? Like he's a piece that I think maybe unlike most other units in Legion, like you can't just drop Cassian in your army and expect to win games. Like he'll be good, he'll be fine, but he's not gonna, like if you don't really have a handle on the situation, like he's not gonna dramatically change how the game goes. Whereas like Vader, sometimes like it's it's clear what Vader wants to do. You put him on the table, you march him towards your opponent, you get him in melee, and he kills stuff, right? And when Vader is successful at doing that, you've kind of won the game most of the time.
Yeah, there's I've had a lot of Vader games where you kind of just like yada 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 the first three turns of the game and then add, but Vader killed everything.
Yes. It's just like, yeah, I lost three stormtrooper units and a mortar, but then I won because Vader got in there and it's game over.
Yeah,
Um, and so he, unlike most other units in Legion, he can put the entire game on his back, even if you lose basically every other piece.
yeah,
Which is to say, like, you can't go wrong, I think, with it. But he is a tough piece to use.
yep.
So maybe this is a good place to talk about Blizzard for us,
Okay, yeah. Let's hit
just
Blizzard Force
because
real
we
quick since
we
we're
are
already
talking about
talking about
Vader.
Vader. Yeah,
Yeah,
I think Blizzard is still good. I think they're. I think people need to adapt to the fact that everything is more expensive. And I know this sounds like heresy. Um, I would personally drop HRUs and use T21 Storms. Um, they're significantly cheaper. They let you get to 10 activations, which we've talked extensively. If you want to hear some good like Blizzard tactics podcasts, go back to roughly a year ago, um, when I was playing Blizzard, like there was no tomorrow. Um, but basically, Blizzard is a objective focus list, right? You've got your speeders, you've got Vader. Those two units are very extremely good at a specific set of objectives, and you want to force your opponent into awkward situations based on that. And in order to do that, particularly for breakthrough, but also for KP, you need to have 10 activations.
the difference between 9 and 10 with Blizzard is wildly different.
Yes, particularly on breakthrough, but also on KP. So, and it used to be on payload, but that's not something you want to be playing. So,
Depends on who you talk to these days, but I agree with you guys.
yeah, which is unfortunate. But yeah, so you got to do what you got to do to push it to 10 activations. And for me, that's downgrading the HRUs to T21s, which is, you know, look, they're not HRUs, but HRUs are also pretty darn expensive now. And they can still get picked off super easily by snipers, which are everywhere. So I'd rather just have like a much cheaper, more expendable unit on the table and make sure that I can get those 10 scoring units on the table for breakthrough.
Yeah, I mean, I
So,
think that this sort of fits in with our overarching narrative for Empire in that you sort of need to go lean on the core, right?
yes.
Like the issue with the core is not that it's not gonna like do damage. It's that you're gonna lose your core units. There is Pierce everywhere right now.
Yep.
It's just, and you have like Empireless just don't have defensive tech. That's just not what they do,
Yeah,
right?
they
Like
don't generate dodges. You know, you can sort of, I guess you could run barrier on like Palpatine, but you're not going to run it on Vader because he's not going to be close to your dudes long enough.
and even if you
Um,
did have barrier, like sure you can barrier like one shot,
right.
but
Yeah.
there's three more coming, right?
Yeah.
And so you're as an Empire player, I do think to some degree the reason that you're padding activations in Blizzard and elsewhere is because you're gonna lose some.
Redundancy.
You're not playing Republic.
Yeah.
You're gonna lose units, right? Um,
But your units are also a lot cheaper, so you can
the
afford that.
well, but not if you're investing in them, right?
Correct.
Like
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and
Not
that's
if
what
you're
I'm
buying
driving
HRUs.
at, right?
Yeah.
Is like the reason you're keeping them lean is because you're going to lose them, and you just need to. That's an upfront cost you need to understand you're paying in the list building phase.
Yep. All right. So Blizzard, it's still an objective list. Um, trim those HRUs or something else to get yourself to 10. So
I think it's kind of got to be the HRUs. I think I don't
I
know
don't
what
know what
else
else
the
I
points.
don't know. Yeah.
Yeah,
Blizzard was already running pretty lean,
yeah.
efficient, but lean. Um, so yeah. All right. Should we talk about weaknesses overall of like a standard Empire list? You already just you kind of talked about one just now. Um, which is for as good as they're at stacking long range Pierce, Empire is like super weak to it also.
Yeah, and I would say that they're definitely not like I would say like Empire and Rebels are like pretty samey as far as like stacking it goes against other players, but with the amount of long range Pierce coming out of Republic right now, that is consistent. The issue with the issue in for Empire players is that the arcs, they're going to pick up a model every time. They're going to
Yep.
have the aim tokens. You're not going to have a dodge. Like every arc shot is going to pick up at least one model. Rebels don't have to worry about that as much because they kind of natively have a lot of dodge tokens floating around, and you can dodge the arc shots. Empire doesn't have access to that, right? Which I think is a big weakness for sure. Um, and I think there's also like the Rebel and sorry, not Rebel, the Ewok, and I guess Ewoks are Rebel. Jesus.
Yeah.
And Wookiee melee SKUs also are packing Pearson melee, right? So like anytime there's just a lot of sort of incidental Pierce walking around. And I think that that's the primary weakness to Empire right now is that you've got to find a way to manage that on the table every game.
Yeah, and as we're coming up with a weakness list, I can't really think of another one except that, as we've sort of noted, their units just don't help each other out a lot directly. But given that their baseline efficiency is higher, that's fine. I don't know if I would put that in like the weakness category so much as just like a fact about how the faction works.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's twofold. I think that because the Empire units tend to be more individual, it's easy to kind of end up in a scenario on the board where your units can't help each other from a just like managing threat bands and like positioning sort of situation. You're like, oh, I don't share tokens. I don't really need to be like range one of all my units. But there are like some also like and then all of a sudden like Boba Fett's like range three away from your army. He's out there on his own. You've either got to like activate him first to get out of harm's way, but then like your opponent can maybe like I don't know, get around a building or whatever and like start taking shots on him. It doesn't have to be Boba. I'm using that as an example. But
Yeah.
like Empire's also got a lot of like infiltrating units that you can kind of toss out there and easily get stranded. I think that's the big thing, is that it's very easy in the course of a game for Empire players to end up with stranded units. Because it feels like those units should be able to operate individually, where you still need to like there are still some core concepts of like playing Legion gun lines, which most Empire lists are, where you still have to keep your stuff like reasonably together in order
Yeah.
to threaten your opponent from making like an aggressive play against you, right?
Right. You have to be able to punish a situation where your opponent shoots at your units. And to do that, your units have to be sort of close to each other, right? So that they can move into a position to do that if your opponent takes shots on one of your units. So yeah, it's very similar to Rebels that they don't have, the droid or clone thing where you have to like really worry about your internal ranges from one unit to the next, which gives you a little bit more flexibility with how you position them. But as you noted, you have to be careful not to take that too far.
Yeah, I
So
mean, I'm going to use this example not because it's a good example, but because we were both there.
yep,
Uh, in our last game at PAX,
yep,
you split your army,
I did.
right? And you're not playing Empire, but it's
The same
the
concept.
same principle stands. Um, and Chewie ended up in a place where he couldn't guardian your sniper strike teams, right? And like it didn't end up mattering. But we both in deployment were like, yeah, that was a mistake, right?
Yep. Mhm.
Like and they were like range three away from each other. It wasn't like something you could just fix, right?
Yeah.
Like that was going to be the game state if for whatever reason I got to like shooting the snipers that were not guardianed off the board. Like there was nothing you could do about it. And I feel like Empire kind of falls into that a lot with just general positioning sort of situations. Again, not the best scenario, but it is one that is recent.
Well, and there was a similar situation like that in that game where it ended up mattering in that I mean they were not far from each other physically, but I had like my vets on one side of a rock thing and I had my commandos on the other. And then I, based on how I essentially set up my reckless diversion, the vets were like far enough away from the other stuff that you were able to like set up a shot where you could shoot at the vets without having to deal with the reckless diversion situation. And that was because I was like, oh, I can just go around both sides of this rock. Who cares? Um, I was wrong.
Yeah. And and this is all to say that like I think Empire and Rebels tends to fall into this category a little bit more than the other factions, including Shadow Collective. Shadow Collective also has a huge incentive to keep their stuff together, right?
Right.
And you still should keep your stuff together, guys.
Yeah.
And that's just something that can feel like a very real weakness if you're like, oh, I'm playing Empire. My units don't care about being close to each other. The answer is they really do.
Yeah. They don't have to be like, like arm in arm, Red Rover style,
Yeah, yeah.
like droids or clones, but they do have to be sort of vaguely in the same area at minimum. And there obviously there are exceptions. There are units that can operate more independently than others. Speeder bikes are one such example because, of course, they can move around so quickly, and um, you know, bounty hunters like Boba Fett, if you can keep them hidden, they are units that can operate just kind of on a flank all by themselves. But yeah, generally speaking, like you're going to want to keep your core units next to each other. You're going to want to keep your special forces close to each other. So, yeah, keep your stuff together ish, even though you don't have to share tokens and stuff. You still want them like supporting each other by being able to attack stuff that attacks the other unit. So,
Um, I'd also like to, I don't know, this might be my biases talking. Um, but I feel like when I'm playing with and against Empire armies, the it hurts more in Empire, I feel like, when you lose a character than most armies. And the reason for that, I think, is that they have a lot of characters that like your whole they like Boba Fett's got like 6 command cards, and if you've
yeah,
got him in your army, he's got like five, at least 5 of the 6 cards are like Boba Fett cards. If Darth Vader's in your army, like probably all 6 are Darth Vader cards.
yeah,
Maybe it's 5, whatever.
yeah,
They have a lot of units that if they die, it eats your entire command hand. It's
yep,
it's not like, oh, I lost Anakin, I still have Padme's cards, right? I lost Luke, I still have Cassian's cards, or I lost Cassian, I still have Luke's cards. Like Empire doesn't really feel like that.
no,
And that's I'm bringing this up because I do think that they're losing access to your command cards is a really big deal in Legion. Priority is, you know, huge, and the command card effects just keep getting better and better and better and more powerful. So like losing the powerful effects that you have access to swing a game, also a big deal. But I feel like when Empire loses a character, they feel it because you just lose so many more cards regularly.
yep,
There's
yeah.
not a
I
ton you
tend to
can
agree with that.
there's not a ton you can do about that. Really. I just wanted to sort of call it out as a weakness in that like, you know, I think I would be more tempted if to like hang my Luke out there than Vader sometimes because like the number of command cards I have in my hand that are his remaining is like is part of those decisions, right? Um,
And
yeah,
and the Empire command cards too are very splashy in like an offensive way. A lot of the like rebel command cards are like, oh, okay, give other units on my side a dodge token or something like that. Whereas with Empire, it's like blow shit up with a rocket. Um, you know,
and I would take that a step further and go and say that a lot of the other factions command cards are kind of redundant. There are a lot of Republic has a lot of like everybody gets dodge tokens. Doesn't really
right,
matter which card you play, everybody gets dodge tokens, right?
right,
Rebels are in a similar situation. It might not be dodge tokens, it might be defenses up or whatever. Like there are 2 or 3 cards that do relatively the same thing. The Empire command cards are like they're just they all do something very specific, and you need it at a very specific time. And if you
Yep.
don't have it, you don't have it, right? Um, which is really good and really powerful. But if you there's not a lot of redundancy built in there.
Yeah, Empire relies on its characters to make like offensive plays, I think, more than the other factions' characters, even the ones that are kind of like hybrid roles or and really even like force users and stuff like that. They can kind of get away with like just be playing in a support role if that's what you want to be doing with them. Empire's characters, other than the exclusive support characters like Krennic and Veers, they kind of like need to be getting in the mix. And a lot of times their command hands are critical to pushing that over the top. So yeah, you need to get your characters involved. Just make sure you're not getting them exposed.
Don't get them dead in the process.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Empire characters are not ones typically that can just kind of chill and be useful.
Yeah. They're
They're
a
very
lot of
action
them.
oriented.
Yeah, they're like 5 health bounty hunters that die just as fast as your stormtrooper
Yeah.
units if they get caught, right? Um, and that's how you should think of them, frankly. These are like 120 point stormtrooper units as far as their how fragile they are.
Yeah. Like IG-88, I've seen people put him out there and be like, hey, he's a character. He's got red saves. He's got armor one. This
He'll
should
be
be great.
fine.
He'll be fine. And then he dies in 2 shots
Yeah,
because he's got 5 health, which is the same as a stormtrooper unit.
yeah.
So yeah, just be careful. Your characters we've used the term scalpel on this cast a lot previously. Basically, that means that a unit that, when used with care and precision, can really like cut deep and do a lot of work, but one that, like you can snap a scalpel pretty easily, right? And that's the case with a lot of Empire characters. Is a lot of them are very mobile. They have some very unique and powerful command card effects. They do very good damage at certain ranges, but at the end of the day, they're still just like, sacks of meat or robots with a health value that typically doesn't have a lot of defensive tech or ways to be supported with defensive tech by other units. So yeah, think of him as like a JJ, it's a stormtrooper unit, right? Boba Fett, again, yeah, he's got surging saves, but those are super fickle, and he's got 5 health, so he's a stormtrooper unit.
Yo, really, really minor tangent.
Yep.
But I was playing against Josh,
Uh-huh.
I think last Thursday, and he crit my Yoda 3 times.
Okay.
Um, and I rolled all blanks, and I just wanted to let you know.
Because I never managed that in our
Yeah,
game.
yeah,
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 I shot Yoda. I definitely shot Yoda too much in our game. That was a mistake.
yeah.
I think if I had not done that, that turn 6 would have been very different. But anyway,
That kind of
I know
tying
that's
that back together,
yeah, yeah.
like most characters are sacks of meat, right? That just can kind of die
Yep.
instantaneously if you leave them out there.
Yep.
You just lose a lot more, I think, with the Empire characters.
Yeah, and they don't tend to have pierce immunity or anything like that typically either.
Yeah,
So,
and
those ranged attacks that have pierce in them can really like chunk some health off in ways that it wouldn't necessarily work against a force user or something like that. So,
yeah, and they've got no defensive tech to mitigate the pierce attacks, right? Like a
correct.
lot of the other
Yeah.
factions are like, yeah, we're doing things to bring the total down, but Empire's just like, nope, it's 5 pierce 1. Godspeed. Hope you roll better than average.
Right. Yeah. Yep, exactly.
Uh,
All right. Should we talk about just some like gunline basics real quick because standard Empire lists are so typically focused on that?
yeah, and um I think it's important to point out that eh, good Empire lists are still standard gun line lists that aren't battle forces, to be
Yes.
clear.
Right.
They really haven't found a niche elsewhere yet. And until that changes, we're gonna live and die on that hill. So if you want to change it, go out there and get those dewbacks rolling. But until then, we're gonna talk about gun lines.
I think you could integrate, actually, I know this is not where we intended to go with this, but briefly, I think you could actually integrate bikes into quite a few like reasonably decent Empire lists.
Yeah, I think that
Um,
that's fair.
I think Blizzard was and still is so amazing with the four bikes that I think people have kind of shied away from standard three bike Empire lists because they're like, whoa, this isn't four, this is horrible. But speeder bikes are pretty reasonably good, efficient units for 70 points. And I think there's still some of the best speeders in the game, even if you can only take three of them. So I think there's probably some unexplored territory with spending some chunk of your points on three bikes in an Empire list. Um, I'm not sure exactly what that ends up looking like, obviously, because I haven't tried it myself since Blizzard, but I think there's probably some unexplored territory there. It's definitely not dewbacks, as you noted,
Yeah, yeah, no, for sure not.
but I think you could potentially break some convention a little bit with bikes. Just normal, good old fashioned, throw three bikes in there and
Yeah,
do like a Vaderless Blizzard type situation. Maybe your playmaker units are bounty hunters or something instead of Vader. But
yeah, I agree. I think you really need to find. I think the big thing is in order to make that work, you need to find an incentive to not play Blizzard, right? Like because
sure,
four bikes is pretty good, right?
four bikes
So
is
like
very good.
you
Yeah,
need to have a reason, I think,
you need
to
to.
do the other thing, and that reason definitely could be out there, right? I think nobody's landed on it yet. There are definitely there are good pieces in Empire that aren't in Blizzard that work well with bikes, like Inferno tends to sometimes the repair kind of just goes by the wayside, right?
Yeah,
It's not bad if you've got bikes in your list. It's just
yep,
oh, incidental, they happen to clip a bike at range. Great, I put it back,
yep,
and it's kind of free, right?
yep.
And I'm not saying that's like a reason to play the
It's something
bikes
to like
outside.
not forget if you happen to be running Inferno with bikes.
Well, and I think it's a reason to Iden and Inferno are also some of the better units in Empire. Like that would be the first place I would be putting my bikes, right? Like is
Yep.
in shells that are already good. So um no, I agree with you.
All right, so gunline 101. I think the biggest thing with gun lines is just kind of managing your ranges. Knowing that the old like speed 2 move with a trooper unit is slightly less than 6 inches and one range band is 6 inches. So if you set up your shores or your mortar or whatever to shoot something at exactly range 4 and not slightly less than range 4, that means that that unit, if it's not a range 4 unit, is not going to be able to move up and shoot you, even if you set aside suppression considerations and such, which makes that equation even less favorable for the shorter ranged unit. But you just, be aware that that's a thing and manage your ranges. And as we said before too, about like keeping units close enough to each other to threaten if one of your units gets attacked, basically you want to do that as well, in that like if you've got a short trooper unit or something and you're moving up to take a shot, make sure that you're not moving up so far that if you have another short trooper unit nearby, they can't move up and also take a shot if something attacks that short trooper unit. So,
So I'd like to continue with that line of thought.
okay.
Because I think I think we can even boil it down into a couple more easy rules to live by. And
Okay.
I think Empire is in a unique situation in that um you're gonna out activate your opponent,
Mm-hmm.
which is like a huge advantage in the gunline fight a lot
Yes.
of the time. The fact that you get to go last means that you can use a stormtrooper piece as kind of like a last first and move them into a higher combat range at the end of a turn where your opponent can't respond and take a good chunky shot, right? Um in theory. But I also think that from a gunline perspective, when you're activating your units in a gun line. And I think that this is super important. And I definitely don't talk about it enough. You should activate the units in the back first,
Yeah.
almost always. There are definitely some exceptions, but you want to activate the units in the back first, bring them up, but generally don't bring them up farther than your farthest forward unit that is unactivated. The reason for this is that you are projecting a threat range, an unactivated threat range from your foremost unit that your opponent has to respect for the duration of the gunline battle. That should be the last thing that goes, unless your opponent like gets off the chain and like really starts to fight, which if they did that, they're probably losing. It's kind of like a who blinks first sort of
Yep.
situation in that respect, right? So it never really clicked to me to talk about it in this sort of way before, but definitely you should always, if you don't know what unit to activate back forward almost always.
Yeah, I would say to the extent that you're talking about like combat units, that's true. I would typically try and activate like support units, or you, we could go into a whole conversation about tempo. But usually, like when I start my turn, I kind of do an assessment about like which units are there any units that absolutely need to activate first, right? Basically, and that's usually like either A, units that are exposed, or B, units that have like a extremely like good chance that you can't pass up to do a lot of damage.
No doubt.
And then, it's like then you've got your timing neutral units, and then you've got your passive units. Um, right?
Yeah, I guess let's get even more specific. I guess what I'm talking about is like the opening stages of a gunline fight
Okay.
in like turn one and turn two.
Yeah, the
You should
positioning battle.
never like it's a positioning battle, and projecting a threat range is pretty much the most important thing you can be doing,
Yep,
because you're probably not getting good damage in if you're playing against a competent opponent.
correct.
And so it's all about positioning and being able to be flexible with where your most flexible unit, which is going to generally be the farthest one forward,
Yep.
depending on the terrain, like there are some things that could change that. But let's assume for a minute that like we're not talking about terrain stuff. You want to go with the back ones first, but I think to your point about like figuring out um like sometimes you go first with the closest unit, right? In the gunline fight. But generally that's after the battle line has kind of like opened fire at range
Yep.
3, right? And so the reason for doing that is you go first with the foremost unit, you activate them, you shoot, and then generally move them back into your line so you have a new unactivated threat kind of projecting unit in front, so that your opponent now has to play into that unit. They don't get to just eat the unit that was up front for free, right?
Correct.
And so yeah, that's gunline 101, I sort of feel like, in a kind of in a nutshell.
Yeah, I think it's easy, especially with Empire, because Empire's like the aim token faction to kind
Yeah,
of
yeah.
get in this rhythm of like, oh, aim, shoot, aim, shoot, aim, shoot. But always be thinking about if a move shoot or shoot move is going to be better for you, because a lot of the times it is. If you're in a situation where, like you said, you're already kind of engaged with your opponent, if there's like multiple units that are at range where they can either make an attack or be an attack, then maybe you want to just do that to try and do as much damage as possible. But sometimes in the initial stages of that fight, like latter half of turn two, like start of turn three, often, like you noted, you'll have a situation where there's just one or two units that are kind of in that zone, in that mutual zone where you can attack each other with like meaningful attack pools, which typically we're talking about range three. Um, and if that's the case, if it's just like one or two units, you might just want to go with that unit first and then turn it into 0 units.
Yes. And I think that happens more often with Empire than the other gunline factions, because they have an incentive to kind of last first you with them.
Mm,
Because you're like, okay, I've got 11 activations. I'm going to pull the Stormtrooper unit into range 3 at the end of the turn, and then I'm going to blast you, right? Which means at the start of the next turn, because you probably didn't kill the unit, it's a Stormtrooper unit,
right.
you're going to you got to get them back to safety, right? And whereas if it's like an 8-on-8 activation fight, or like a 9-on-9, I feel like you generally end up with more units in the range in simultaneous range band fights than if you're out activating your opponent significantly.
Yep, I tend to agree. It turns into more of a straight slugfest earlier.
Yes.
Yeah.
Um,
All right. Any other like sort of general standard playing Empire tips?
um, I think I would like to. I think with Empire stuff, it's easy to get caught up in the I were like the shooty, killy faction, and it's very easy to kind of get sucked into the like, oh no, I need to kill that unit right now, and not be happy with like marginal value plays. And I see this happen a lot with like bounty hunters,
Yeah,
in that people sort of get sucked into like, no, Boba Fett's got to kill that whole unit, so I'm gonna take the aim token sort of situation. Kind of what you were alluding to before with like Boba Fett's got to do damage. He's just got to kill the thing.
yeah,
And no, you should be happy with the two models Boba Fett picked up off the table and put them somewhere he can't be shot. uh,
yeah.
and that goes with a lot of the Empire characters. Even like Vader. Like if you didn't do damage with him, at the end of the day, keeping your pieces safe is more important than your pieces doing damage still. And
Typically,
don't let
yeah,
that get kind of take your focus away from preserving your units. Just because they're cheap and you're expecting to lose them does not mean you should give them away. Um,
yes,
and I tend to see that a lot. Um,
yeah. This is not like Russian style like penal unit, you know, flames of war type situation.
they're
Um,
not 14 activation Ewoks, right?
right.
like
Yeah, your units are still they're cheaper, right? But they're still going to be like more they're still more expensive than rebel units. They're still more expensive than most droid units. So
if you're taking shores, they're more expensive than most Republic or Shadow Collective units.
that's true. Yeah.
Just so that we're like on the level here.
Yeah.
Like the core units are still expensive.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, shores are 84 points,
Yeah.
right? Which is more than a phase one. So
I think it's also more than a phase two mortar.
yes, it definitely is because of a phase two C6 is 87.
Yeah. Like,
So
yeah.
yeah. Um, that said, shores have a, you know, relatively little need to be supported by anything. They have very good offense
Well,
at
they're a great
range
unit.
3 and decent offense at range 4.
Yeah.
So,
Um,
um, but yeah, it's right. Don't throw them away.
they
They're
still die like
still
stormtroopers.
they still die like stormtroopers. Yeah.
Yeah. It's,
And stormtroopers too. Don't throw your stormtroopers away either. I know they're like the original red shirts, but they're still important, useful units that if they get to stick around, they can do some decent stuff. So, all right. Should we talk about Tempest real quick?
yeah, I definitely want to spend some time talking about the battle forces that are not Blizzard because yeah, they're different. I'm still not convinced Tempest is good. Um,
It's not bad.
yeah, I'll give you that. I will say that so far, the way I feel about Tempest is that it's like it's fine. I actually think Remnant is better than Tempest. And I think Remnant is still kind of like low key one of the better lists you could be running these days.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that.
Um, just because it kind of cranks the efficiency levels of like all of the Empire units are like good on their own, right? And then now you're just giving them all free aim tokens.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, the lack of
It-
any like real command cards is
it's a
definitely
thing.
awkward.
Yeah.
Um, but
And Gideon isn't great.
he's not.
Like he's really
Yeah.
not good. Um, but yeah, let's talk about Tempest. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
I mean, I think there's really like two ways to run Tempest, and that's
Mhm.
either some kind of ATST saturation, which and there's even that. I think there's many different ways to do.
Yep.
You could do the just point blank grenade launcher, triple ATST, get in your face and force your opponent to answer it kind of a thing. You could do the triple ATST longer range. You can't shoot me with anything, but all my stuff is range four, or all my important stuff is range four, kind of a thing. You could do some mix of like ATSTs and bikes. So there's that. And I think that's like if you want to play an ATST, I think that's easily the best way to do it
Oh
is as
yeah,
part of
it's not
Tempest Force,
close.
and
It's
it's not
not
close.
close. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um, there's also the like six scout sniper situation, possibly with an ATST, possibly with the bikes. I think that could be better than people are giving it credit for, personally.
I
Six,
think if it was in any other meta we've had in this game, I might agree with you. I think. I think the fact that Wookiee spam lists exist is a
yeah,
real problem.
yeah, that's definitely true.
I just like I don't know what you do against like in that matchup. Or like the Ewok spam stuff. It's like Ewoks feel like a little bit more tenable because I feel like your full scouts might be able to delete an Ewok squad with regularity.
Yeah, if you get some good range two shots on there, but even like a good range two scout shot is going to be like, okay, like I did 5 wounds to your Wookiee unit, I killed one.
Right, right,
You
right.
know,
I've turned tenacity on. You're still like cracking back for
right?
like
And now we're at
five
range two
pierce
from each other.
one. Like
Yeah, right.
I don't know.
But I think it could be pretty good against like almost literally everything else. You know, six snipers is a lot.
It is a lot. I definitely think that yeah, I agree. I think it's pretty one-dimensional in that you
Well, yeah.
don't have a lot of like flexibility in what you're doing. It
Hmm.
definitely is a powerful thing you can do. Um,
It also doesn't really use the strengths of the battle force in that all of the battle force's command cards, except for one, are vehicle related. And yeah, it doesn't do any it doesn't leverage the battle force in any way except for the ability to take six of something,
which is, I mean,
which is
look,
not nothing.
breaking force orgs turns out is real good.
Yeah.
I think have we I don't think we've seen anything that doesn't break the force or not make some sort of wave. Um,
I think there was too many double negatives in there for me.
sorry. I everything that has broken the force org in some way, shape, or form has been at least kind of good.
Yes, that's true.
Um, I think the the one that has maybe been the least good is the separatist invasion force,
Yeah.
probably. But
Which
people
is
still
and it's
ran
part of
that to
that is
success.
yeah, and part of that too is because it's not really that different from like a normal separatist list.
Yeah, no, totally. Um, but yeah, I mean, anytime you break the force org, I think that in and of itself is super powerful. I mean, I think if the only thing Blizzard gave you was well, four speeder bikes, like it would be fine,
Yeah.
right? Like if the only thing that the 501st gave you is you could take four special forces, it would be fine, you know. Anyways, uh, but yeah, I actually think that the vehicle version of Tempest is probably the one that scares me the most.
Yeah.
Um, and mainly because it it really pushes my pet peeve buttons of things that are unintelligible. Just because I don't know, I don't like vehicles. Um, but you can really like you probably shouldn't play payload, but if you're gonna play payload in a list, like play it in that list, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
And people, I mean, a lot of people kind of undervalue the possible shenanigans on things like hostage
yep,
with three ATSTs.
you
Because
can you
hostages are displacement is not an enemy effect. You can displace your own hostage to get it closer. And this is, people are like, well, how does that work? because the person that moves the unit, in this case the ATST, is not the person that moves the unit being displaced. But because of how big the ATST base is, you can create situations where there's like literally only one direction to move the unit.
Yep.
And for your opponent's hostage, that's going to be towards you. And for your hostage, also going to be towards you. And by the way, they get suppression too when that happens. And then they also get blocked from moving back the direction that they actually want to go.
Yeah, they're going in the wrong direction, and then
Yeah.
they are also going to go in the wrong direction again.
Yeah. And you
Right.
can do that with the scout moves. And then you can do it with the actual ATST moves. And you can do it 3 times.
Yes.
So yeah, don't play hostage against triple ATST.
Yeah, and like even in that vein, like playing breakthrough against triple ATST, they can just wall their ATSTs so that you can't shoot any of their units that are breaking through,
Yeah.
and like screen them. They can do the same thing with like bombing run. Like there's a lot of tech you can use with mobile, you know, how big is an ATSD? Like 10-inch tall buildings
Right.
that you can make adjacent to each other,
Right.
right? With how the new vehicle silhouette stuff works.
Yeah.
So, um,
Yeah, they're basically like giant grain silos that you're just moving around the table, kind of wherever
right.
you want. Yeah.
They could not shoot. They'd probably be bad, but like they'd still be effective at doing some like really crazy objective stuff.
That's why people take naked buses in Shadow Collective.
Yep. It's Anyways, I don't like it because it really, I think, detracts from my experience. But it is a
Yep.
powerful thing you can be doing, and I do think it's one of the reasons to take Tempest.
Yep.
Yeah,
All right. What about Remnant?
yeah. I mean, I think Remnant leans into the Imperial fantasy potentially the most, in that it's just like, nope, we're gonna line up across from each other, and we're gonna shoot each other, and I'm gonna have more guns than you, and um it kind of wants to start the gunline battle early, and I think it just sort of leverages the fact that your units are like just hyper efficient and makes them more hyper efficient. If you lose your units, you lose. If you don't lose your units, you win. It's kind of there's not a lot of play to it. I feel like in that regard, outside of like standard gunline play, right? Like when there's no command cards really. You don't have any tricks. You're just trying to shoot your opponent off the table. And it has a lot of just innate tools to do that. Um, that's really all I have to say about it. It's not really effectively that different from like a normal Imperial gun line. Outside, you have less tricks and your stuff's just better, right?
Well, your stuff's better at shooting specifically.
Yes, shooting specifically, it still
Yeah.
dies the same for the
I mean,
most
you could
part.
take dodge tokens with your independent, actually, which would be reasonably helpful against arcs. But
Yes, that's probably fair. I definitely have not played against Remnant in a while. Um, and that would probably be decent in the opening stages of the game when you're
right,
not shooting, right?
right. Yep.
Taking the dodges when you're not shooting would be fine. Um, but yeah, still
We
still B plus, I think, list as far as like what Imperials have access to. I think all the Imperial battle forces are just good,
they are. Yeah.
right?
Are you using Dark Troopers with that?
Um, Man, I just wish we lived in a world where I never had to say the word Dark Trooper ever again. Um, I Dark Troopers still scare the ever living bejesus out of me. Um, so yeah, I think Dark Troopers are like, it's one of those units that can never win a tournament anymore, I think, because they're a little too easy to kill, I think, to make it through like 8 rounds without just getting tabled once. Because
Especially
somebody's
if you're running to like a Wookiee bowcaster list or something like that. Yeah.
there's a lot of incidental impact Pierce running around at the moment. Um, Whether it might not be impact, it might just be like critical or
Yeah.
surge crit, right?
Right.
Um, but there's a lot of just Dark troopers sort of just get eaten up, which I think is fine. It's we've seen what the world looks like when dark troopers are good, and it's not one most of us want to live in.
Right.
So, but it is a list that can ruin your day. I think still I would put dark troopers in the spoiler category. They're if you're bringing dark troopers to a tournament, you're not there to win it. You're there to spoil somebody else's run, probably.
Yep.
And that's not to say that like I'm not saying that that person is a bad person for doing that or whatever. But
Or even that that's their intent, but that's
or
gonna
that's
be
the right
that's
that
gonna
yes
probably be the result of what they're
that
doing.
right
Yeah.
that is likely to be the result of at least
It's a
a game or
gatekeeper
two.
list.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah, I don't know. I think most lists I build nowadays are able to handle armor at least in a to a point that you can play the game if but I think dedicated SKUs are still a thing that sometimes you just don't roll crits. Um,
Yep.
so
Okay,
I don't
that's
know.
fair.
What was your original question there? You said like,
If
what do
you're
you think about
using
Dark
if
Troopers?
you're Dark Troopers and Remnant specifically.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that if you're gonna take Dark Troopers, you should be taking the 6-man units.
Yep, for sure.
Um, I'm not convinced you're taking both the ranged heavies anymore. I could be persuaded that the heavy weapons are different. I know that sounds like blasphemy. I'm sorry. But just because I do think like just like getting your dark troopers into melee is also like a reasonable strategy. Um, but you definitely have to take 6, I think, if you want them to not just die.
And I think too, and this doesn't work great with Remnant, so maybe this answers my question, but you want to try and make a case for aggressive tactics also,
Oh,
if you can fit it in
100%.
there.
Yeah, 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 for sure.
So I almost think I'd run them with like Krennic
Yeah, I mean, I
in a normal
remember
Empire list.
uh Corey was running a Krennic double dark trooper list that the last time we went to New Jersey. And he was the other X and O list that won an invite. Um, Still scary,
Yeah.
you know. Yeah. Putting standbys on dark troopers also pretty good.
Unstrippable ones.
Mostly on strip.
Mostly, yeah. Force Push obviously can do it still, but
Yeah. Um,
yeah. And also, something as simple as like Voracious Ambition, a 1-pip cunning when you got Dark Troopers on the table. Yeah.
yeah, which is turns out like you're probably going to draw heavy out of your bag for that one
Yeah.
pip because you probably have 4 tokens in the bag,
Right,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
And if you don't draw one,
You've
well,
drawn everything else.
your bag's probably just heavy tokens,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
So, uh, yeah, no, I definitely think that there's play there. I think at its core, I think maybe to sum this discussion up, I think Empire has a really hard time right now just winning. I think any individual game is very winnable. I think consistency is tough for Empire because of the fragility of their units that we've sort of, I think, highlighted today. And I think any way that you can like mitigating that is going to lead you to a lot more success. And making sure that you keep those units alive for longer is going to. I know that like that sort of sounds like, well, just keep your stuff alive, you'll lose less, but that's not really what I mean. I think it's kind of going out of your way to keep your stuff alive, very intentionally, more than like go above and beyond.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm actually mulling, like just including Protector IRG just as a thing. I know taking up a special forces slot isn't ideal, but as much as I've been using Chewie and been super impressed with him, Protector IRG is pretty much objectively better at doing Chewie's job than Chewie is because they have red saves and they have almost the same amount of wounds. Uh, Now, obviously, the offense, I think I'd rather have Chewie's bowcaster most of the time, unless you're talking about whacking stuff in melee, than like a protector IRG pool. But purely from a guardian perspective, they're the same cost. It's 95 points for like a if you take the electro and protector. Chewie's 95 points with protector. They've got 8 wounds. He's got 9. They have red saves. He's got a t-shirt save. So, um, at least as far as that like one specific role is concerned, I think Empire might have an underutilized tool there. Uh,
Yeah, I would agree with you. I would even go as far as to say that maybe you shouldn't take the Electro Staff if that's your plan.
yeah,
Because right now you're gonna need them to Guardian Pierce shots almost definitely. Like
yeah,
that's the thing that they're gonna be doing the most.
right.
And by the time that you get them to melee, they're gonna be crap anyways. Like
Yeah, that's fair.
the only reason to take the electro staff is to, I think, increase the amount of
It
wounds
gives
you
you
have
2 extra
access
wounds.
to, right?
Yeah,
I'm just once you're in the like 100-point range for a guardian unit, I'm a little sus on it, I think. Um,
that's fair.
Whereas like, what's protectors 4 points these days? Like you can take a
5.
74 point IRG unit. It's basically a core unit, it's basically like a boil unit that does the boil thing better,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, because
Um,
Boyle doesn't typically have access to protector.
doesn't have access to protector and only can peel one as opposed to two.
Right.
Um, you know, so yeah, definitely a thing I think Imperial players should kind of look at doing more often. Um, it's funny we were talking about a list that will not be named until post Worlds, um, before this cast, and we had basically this exact discussion.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's interesting. I'm interested in exploring some territory with
Yeah.
those guys, particularly once Inquisitors show up.
Hmm.
So,
I did try. I will say I tried a Darth Vader double Inquisitor. I want to say it was triple IRG list. I think the IRG were naked, just to be
okay.
clear. Like
Still,
they weren't like full
the
IRG.
fact that that's a sentence.
um
Yeah, how
it
was it?
was all right.
Okay.
I only played it once. It wasn't really my cup of tea, but it's definitely a thing you can do to make your opponent mad.
I feel like that leans a little bit too much into the ARG. Like if you've got Vader and 2 Inquisitors, do you really need I mean, maybe you take 1 unit of IRG for Guardian reasons, but do you really need like 3?
Well, it was just the idea was to basically like pin your opponent's units with the IRG, and then they literally can't do anything about it because I can't force push your dudes out because of the Inquisitors, right?
Correct, yeah.
So you just like you tie up all of the things you're not killing with the IRG and then kill
Uh,
everything else with Vader, basically.
Vader and the Inquisitors, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So and yeah, anyway, it was it I did it as a meme, and at the end of the
Uh,
game, I was like, I mean, if I got better at this, it could be good. I don't know.
I mean, if you think about the fact too that if you use new ways to motivate them on your Inquisitors, they can triple move into melee with stuff.
Oh
Uh,
yeah, no, it's definitely gross, and it was like I didn't even really think about the game. I literally W keyed it. Like I was just like, yep. We set up on battle lines. I set up across from you. I double move across. Like it was not like
there's not a lot of strategy nuance to what you're doing.
no, no. And there definitely could have been for sure. Uh, but I just like, yeah, it was like at the end of turn one, like I was like range one away from their entire army with like 2 Inquisitors, Vader, and 3 units of IRG. And I think I'd have to go back and maybe it was only 2 units of IRG. I definitely had heavy weapons and 3 Stormtrooper squads. like like I had T-21s or something like shooting behind it. Like it felt a little silly. Um, but I is that good? I think Wookiee's probably still eats that list alive.
Yeah, because the whole premise of that list is like you want to be getting as close to your opponent as quickly as possible, and Wookiees are like, yeah,
Yeah, yes, please.
great.
Hit me with your crappy lightsabers, please.
Right. Yes.
Um, anyhow, uh, but IRG, yeah, I think IRG are definitely they've always been in the Imperial Arsenal. Um, take them out for a spin.
Yeah. All right. Any final thoughts?
Come to Golden Sprue. It'll be a awesome time. Um, leave us any comments about stuff you want to hear about as far as Imperial shenanigans in the comments, or if you thought we were right or wrong. I love hearing if I'm wrong. It's great. Um, but yeah. We'd love to hear feedback. So that's what I got.
All right. Awesome. Well, we are the Notorious Scoundrels. I'm Kyle.
And I'm Mike.
Stay fresh, cheese bags.